Welcome to the world of science fiction stories, and don't forget to share and subscribe the channel. He wakes up in an unknown place, finds a beautiful humanoid alien girl curiously inspecting him. The first thing Jeremy felt was a pounding headache, like someone had taken a sledgehammer to his skull. The second was the unfamiliar softness beneath his back, definitely not the hard bunk of his military transport ship. His eyelids fluttered open, then immediately squeezed shut against the bright artificial light flooding his vision. "What the hell," he muttered, raising a hand to shield his eyes. As his vision adjusted, Jeremy realized he was lying on a bed in what appeared to be a dormitory room. The walls were a pristine white with strange, flowing script etched into them that seemed to shimmer with an inner light. Various objects floated on anti-gravity shelves, books, strange devices, and what looked like plants from a dozen different worlds. Jeremy tried to sit up, only to discover he was wearing nothing but dark blue briefs. His muscled torso was completely exposed, and there was no sign of his uniform anywhere. Panic began to rise in his chest as fragmented memories surfaced: the mission, the unexpected anomaly, the blinding flash of light, and then nothing. Finally awake, a soft, melodic voice asked from somewhere to his right. Jeremy whipped his head around so fast he nearly gave himself whiplash. Sitting at the foot of his bed, one leg tucked beneath her, was quite possibly the most striking woman he'd ever seen, if she was human, which she clearly wasn't. Her skin was a vibrant, luminous red that seemed to glow under the room's lighting. Long, silvery white hair cascaded down her back and over her shoulders like liquid moonlight. Her eyes were large, almond-shaped, and a startling violet color with no visible pupils. She wore a tight, matte black bodysuit that left her shoulders, legs, and a generous portion of her chest exposed, accentuating a figure that would make supermodels weep with envy. But what struck Jeremy most was the expression on her face, pure, undiluted scientific curiosity, as if he were a particularly fascinating specimen under a microscope. "Who the hell are you?" Jeremy demanded, scrambling backward until his back hit the wall. "Where am I? What happened to my ship?" The alien woman tilted her head, those violet eyes studying him with increased interest. "Your speech patterns match the linguistic database perfectly," she murmured, more to herself than to him. She leaned forward, close enough that Jeremy could smell something like cinnamon and ozone emanating from her. "I've never seen a living human this close before." Her slender fingers reached out, and before Jeremy could react, she was tracing the contours of his face with a touch so light it was barely perceptible. "Stop that." Jeremy batted her hand away, his military training kicking in as he assessed potential escape routes. The room had one door and what appeared to be a large window overlooking, holy shit, was that a space station? The red-skinned woman didn't seem offended by his reaction. If anything, she looked even more intrigued. Fascinating. Defensive response: is this typical human behavior when confronted with the unknown? "Lady, you've got about 5 seconds to tell me where I am Before you what?" She smiled, revealing teeth that were just a bit too sharp to be human. "You're currently in my dormitory at the Galactic Confluence University, specifically the Xenobiology wing. And you, Jeremy Hayes, are the subject of my graduation research project." Jeremy froze. "How do you know my name?" "Your identification tags," she replied, gesturing to a small table where his dog tags lay. "I'm Kaala, by the way. Kaala Tanari, 4th-year Xenobiology student specializing in emergent sentient species." She extended a hand in what was clearly an attempt to mimic a human greeting. "Your species' custom is to shake hands, correct?" Jeremy ignored the offered hand. "How did I get here?" "Last thing I remember, I was on a recon mission near the Arcturus sector." Kaala's expression shifted to something that might have been guilt. "Ah, yes, about that. Your vessel encountered one of our university's research probes. It seems the automated defense systems interpreted your approach as hostile and, well, teleported you here." "Teleported?" Jeremy repeated incredulously. That's impossible. We don't have that technology. You don't, Kala agreed cheerfully. We do. Though I should clarify, only you were teleported. Your vessel and crew continued on their way, likely assuming you were killed in what they would perceive as a minor explosion. The implications hit Jeremy like a punch to the gut. His crew would report him as Kia. No one would be looking for him. He was effectively stranded in what appeared to be an alien university, wearing nothing but his underwear, being studied by a beautiful red-skinned woman who looked at him like he was an interesting bug. Fuck me, he groaned, running a hand through his short brown hair. Kala's eyes widened. Is that an invitation or an expression of dismay? The database is unclear on the contextual usage. Despite everything, Jeremy couldn't help but let out a bark of laughter. Expression of dismay, definitely. He took a deep breath, military training kicking in, assessed the situation, adapt, survive. So I'm what, your lab rat now? Oh, nothing so crude, Kala assured him, looking mildly offended. You're a research subject, yes, but with full autonomy and rights. The ethics committee would have my head otherwise. She paused and then added with a hint of pride, you're actually the first human to ever set foot on our campus, you know. We've observed your species from afar for centuries, but direct contact has been limited. Limited? Jeremy repeated flatly. And why is that? Kala's expression turned diplomatic. Let's just say your species has a reputation for being somewhat volatile when encountering new civilizations. That's rich coming from someone who just kidnapped me. Not kidnapped, Kala corrected quickly. Rescued. The probe's defensive measures would have vaporized you otherwise. The teleportation was a failsafe. Jeremy wasn't buying it, but arguing wouldn't get him anywhere. He needed information, and this Kala seemed willing to talk. So what happens now? He asked cautiously, relaxing his defensive posture slightly. Kala brightened immediately. Now you help me complete my thesis on human adaptability in non-terrestrial social structures. In return, you'll be given accommodation, sustenance, and eventually, once my research is complete, we can discuss returning you to your people. She clapped her hands together. Doesn't that sound wonderful? Sounds like I don't have much choice, Jeremy muttered. There's always choice, Kala said, suddenly serious. If you truly wish to leave, arrangements can be made, but I should warn you, the bureaucracy involved would take approximately one standard solar cycle, and in the meantime, you'd be placed in quarantine rather than allowed to freely experience our campus. Jeremy weighed his options, quarantine in some alien facility versus playing along with this bizarre research project. At least the latter would give him freedom to move, gather information, maybe even find a way home on his own terms. Fine, he said finally. I'll help with your research. But I want clothes, information, and some goddamn privacy. Kala's face lit up with genuine delight. Excellent. I've already prepared appropriate attire based on human physiological requirements. She bounded off the bed with inhuman grace and retrieved a stack of clothing from a nearby drawer. These should fit. The fabric adapts to body temperature and environmental conditions. Jeremy accepted the clothes, a simple black shirt and pants that felt like some kind of synthetic material, along with boots that looked surprisingly similar to his military-issue ones. I'll give you privacy to change, Kala said, moving toward the door. When you're ready, I'll show you around the campus and explain everything in more detail. She paused at the threshold. And Jeremy, thank you. This opportunity means more to me than you can imagine. As the door closed behind her, Jeremy sat on the edge of the bed, clothes in hand, trying to process the absurdity of his situation, stranded on an alien campus, research subject for a beautiful red-skinned woman who seemed equal parts brilliant and naive. Well, he muttered to himself as he pulled on the shirt, at least it beats being vaporized. Ready for the grand tour? Kala asked as Jeremy emerged from the dormitory room, now fully dressed in the strange adaptive clothing she'd provided. Yeah, the material felt oddly responsive against his skin, adjusting to his body temperature with subtle, almost imperceptible movements. As ready as I'll ever be, Jeremy replied, still processing his bizarre situation. Lead the way, Professor. Kaala's violet eyes sparkled with amusement. I'm not a professor yet, just a senior student. But with your help, that title might not be far off. She guided him down a corridor that seemed to shift subtly as they walked, the walls occasionally becoming transparent to reveal breathtaking views of space. Jeremy couldn't help but stare at the massive structure extending outward in all directions, a sprawling complex of interconnected buildings, domes, and garden spaces suspended in the void. Welcome to Galactic Confluence University, Kaala announced proudly. The premier educational institution in the 7 systems, home to over 300 species and 12,000 students. As they entered what appeared to be a central atrium, Jeremy froze. The space was teeming with alien life, beings of every conceivable shape, size, and color moved through the area with purpose. Some appeared vaguely humanoid, while others defied categorization entirely. Floating orbs of light conversed with tentacled creatures. Tall, willowy beings with iridescent skin browsed holographic displays alongside squat, armored individuals that reminded Jeremy of walking tanks. Holy shit, he breathed, unconsciously moving closer to Kaala. Overwhelming, isn't it? She said sympathetically. Don't worry, most species here have never seen a human before, but they're generally respectful of biological diversity. Generally? Jeremy questioned, noticing several curious stares already directed his way. Well, there are always exceptions, Kaala admitted, which brings me to something important you should know. She guided him to a quieter alcove, her expression turning serious. Humans are classified as a protected species under galactic concordant regulations. Protected? What does that mean exactly? It means Earth is essentially considered a wildlife preserve, she explained carefully. Your species hasn't developed faster-than-light travel independently yet, so contact is strictly regulated. Most galactic citizens view humans as, well. As what? Jeremy pressed, a sinking feeling in his stomach. As promising but underdeveloped, Kaala finished diplomatically. Something like intelligent children? Jeremy felt his face flush with indignation. We've split the atom, mapped our genome, and landed on our moon. We're hardly children. By galactic standards, those are kindergarten achievements, Kaala said gently. But that's what makes you, so fascinating. Your species accomplishes so much despite your limitations. Your adaptability, creativity, and determination are unmatched. Before Jeremy could respond, a deep, resonant voice interrupted them. So the rumors are true. You've acquired a human specimen. They turned to find a tall, imposing figure regarding them with cold interest. His skin was a metallic blue-gray, with ridges running along his hairless skull. His eyes, 4 of them, arranged in a diamond pattern, blinked independently as they focused on Jeremy. Professor Krell, Kaala acknowledged, her posture stiffening. This is Jeremy Hayes. He's participating in my research voluntarily. Fascinating, Krell said, circling Jeremy like a predator. Such primitive physiology, yet surprisingly robust. The musculature suggests regular physical training. I'm standing right here, Jeremy growled, and I can understand every word you're saying. Krell's upper eyes widened slightly. It speaks with remarkable coherence. Tanari, you've outdone yourself. Perhaps your research might be salvageable after all. Kaala's red skin darkened with what Jeremy guessed was the equivalent of a blush. My research methodology has been approved by the Ethics Committee, Professor. Jeremy is a research participant, not a specimen. Semantics, Krell dismissed. Human, I would be interested in conducting some comparative physiological assessments. My laboratory is far better equipped than the student facilities. His name is Jeremy, Kaala interjected firmly, and he's already committed to my research program. Krell's 4 eyes narrowed. Need I remind you, student Tanari, that as department head, I have priority access to all research subjects of significant scientific value. Jeremy stepped forward, drawing himself to his full height, still a head shorter than Krell, but his military bearing made up for it. Need I remind you, Professor, that I'm not a lab rat to be passed around? I've agreed to work with Kaala, not you. The alien professor regarded Jeremy with newfound interest. Remarkable. Such territorial aggression despite being in an entirely unfamiliar environment. Perhaps there's something to your theories about human adaptability after all, Tanari. He turned to leave, but not before adding, we'll discuss this further, student. My laboratory remains at your disposal, for now. As Krell departed, Jeremy noticed Kaala trembling slightly. You okay? Professor Krell is influential, she said quietly, and not accustomed to being refused. Seems like a real asshole, Jeremy observed. Kaala's translator must have captured the sentiment perfectly because she burst into melodious laughter. That's one way of putting it. Come on, let's continue the tour before we attract more attention. As they moved through the campus, Jeremy became increasingly aware of the stares following them, some curious, some wary, some openly hostile. He'd been in enough combat zones to recognize when he was being sized up as a potential threat. Why do I get the feeling I'm not welcome here? He murmured to Kaala. It's not you specifically, she explained. Humans have a reputation. Your species' history is filled with remarkable achievements but also with conflict and aggression. Some more conservative species consider humans potentially dangerous. And what do you think? Jeremy asked, suddenly curious about her perspective. Kaala's violet eyes met his, and something in her gaze made his pulse quicken. I think humans are fascinating. Your capacity for adaptation, for emotional connection, for overcoming impossible odds, it's unlike anything in the galaxy. Her hand brushed against his as they walked, the contact sending an unexpected jolt through his system. Her skin was warmer than humans, with a texture like velvet. Sorry, she said quickly, withdrawing her hand. I forgot about human personal space protocols. It's fine, Jeremy assured her, surprised to find he meant it. Cultural differences, right? Now that's part of your research. Yes, Kaala confirmed, her silver hair catching the light as she nodded. Including physiological responses to various stimuli. Your heart rate just increased by approximately 20% from that brief contact. Jeremy felt heat rise to his face. You can tell that? My species has naturally enhanced sensory perception, she explained. I can detect subtle changes in your body temperature, heart rate, pupil dilation. She trailed off, her own skin darkening slightly. It's purely scientific observation, right? Jeremy said, not entirely convinced. Purely scientific. As they continued their tour, Jeremy found himself increasingly drawn to Kaala's animated explanations and genuine enthusiasm. Despite his predicament, he couldn't help but be fascinated by this new world, and by her. When they finally returned to the dormitory, Kaala paused at the door. I've arranged for you to have your own quarters adjacent to mine, for research convenience, of course. Of course, Jeremy echoed, a smile tugging at his lips despite everything. Rest well, Jeremy Hayes, Kaala said softly. And tomorrow, we begin the real research. Something in her tone made Jeremy wonder exactly what that research might entail. You want me to what? Jeremy stared at Kaala in disbelief as she laid out her plan for the day. Attend classes with me, she repeated, adjusting the collar of the new outfit she'd provided him, a more formal version of yesterday's adaptive clothing. It's perfect for my research. I need to observe how you process and respond to advanced concepts and how others react to your presence. I'm not exactly qualified for alien university courses, Jeremy pointed out. My degree's in tactical operations, not whatever the hell nonlinear quantum consciousness is. He gestured at the holographic schedule floating between them. Kaala's lips curved into that now familiar smile that made his chest tighten. That's precisely what makes it fascinating. Your species approaches problems differently. Your perspectives might be illuminating. Jeremy sighed, knowing he was fighting a losing battle. Fine. But if anyone tries to dissect me, I'm out. Deal, Kaala laughed, the sound like wind chimes. Though I should warn you, Professor Krell is teaching the afternoon seminar. Jeremy groaned. Great. Just what I needed. The first class, Comparative Xenobiology, was held in a circular chamber with tiered seating. As they entered, the buzz of conversation died immediately. Dozens of alien faces turned toward them, expressions ranging from curiosity to outright alarm. Is that a human? Whispered a being with translucent skin, its internal organs shifting hypnotically as it spoke. I thought they were quarantined to their solar system, another student with feathered appendages muttered. The professor, a six-limbed insectoid being, clicked its mandibles excitedly. Student Tanari, I received your request, but I didn't actually believe. Please bring your research subject forward. Participant, Kaala corrected firmly. This is Jeremy Hayes, and he's participating voluntarily in my thesis research. Jeremy stepped forward, drawing on every diplomatic briefing he'd received during military training. Thank you for allowing me to observe your class, he said, keeping his voice steady despite the scrutiny. The professor's compound eyes gleamed. Remarkable articulation. Class, this is an unprecedented opportunity. Today's scheduled lecture on alien respiratory systems seems particularly apartment human. Would you be willing to demonstrate your breathing apparatus? I'd prefer to keep my clothes on, Jeremy replied dryly, earning a few translator-delayed laughs from the students. The professor tilted its head, apparently processing the humor. Ah, a jest. Fascinating. Very well, please be seated. As the lecture progressed, Jeremy found himself increasingly engaged. Despite the advanced terminology, the concepts weren't entirely foreign. Biology was biology, even across species. When the professor opened the floor for questions, he surprised himself by raising his hand. The adaptive respiratory filtration you described, humans have something similar, though more primitive. Our nasal passages filter particulates, and our immune system targets foreign bodies. We've also developed artificial respirators for hostile environments. The classroom erupted in murmurs. The professor's mandibles clicked rapidly in what Jeremy guessed was excitement. A cogent observation. Perhaps the classification committee has underestimated human cognitive development. Student Tanari, your research subject, participant, shows remarkable comprehension. Kaala beamed with pride, her hand briefly squeezing Jeremy's thigh under the desk. The touch sent an electric current through him, and he caught her violet eyes widening slightly as she undoubtedly sensed his physiological response. Sorry, she whispered quickly, removing her hand. Cultural differences. Maybe we should discuss those differences more thoroughly, Jeremy whispered back, surprising himself with his boldness. For your research, of course. Kaala's red skin darkened noticeably. Of course. Research. The morning passed in a blur of classes, each more bizarre than the last. In theoretical physics, Jeremy's primitive understanding of causality apparently offered a refreshing perspective. In galactic history, his questions about human exclusion from interstellar politics sparked a heated debate. By lunchtime, Jeremy had become something of a celebrity. Students crowded their table in the dining hall, peppering him with questions about Earth, human biology, and cultural practices. Is it true humans only have two genders? Asked a gelatinous being that appeared to be constantly shifting between forms. Do you really sleep horizontally for 8 hours every cycle? Inquired another. Why do you cover your reproductive organs with fabric when they are not in use? Questioned a third. Jeremy fielded the questions as best he could, alternately amused and mortified. Through it all, Kaala sat beside him, her thigh occasionally pressing against his, each contact sending waves of warmth through his body. "You're enjoying this," he accused her during a brief lull. "Immensely," she admitted, violet eyes sparkling. "Your responses are providing invaluable data on human social adaptability." "Glad I could help," he muttered, though he couldn't suppress a smile. Their afternoon, however, took a decidedly unpleasant turn when they arrived at Professor Krell's advanced xenopsychology seminar. The four-eyed professor's face remained impassive, but Jeremy could sense his displeasure. "Student Tanari. Human. How educational that you've joined us today." The seminar began innocuously enough, with Krell lecturing on cognitive development across species, but soon his examples began to focus exclusively on primitive responses to stress, fear, and aggression, with pointed references to human history.